Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, that was loud.
Yeah, but is there any way to get the temperature turned down in here?
Yeah, it was just baking.
Dr. Douglas, Coach Orton. Yeah, good to see you. Oh, that's all right. I'm excited to have you speak today. So you want to put your own Zoom or do you need me to click this one? Oh, okay, so you can do it. Yeah, there, right there. You want to close it up? Well, get it out. Shoot, I forgot to bring this. And walk the finger under something. I'm sorry. And I left it alone. Yeah, I know. Yeah, right. Yeah, but I still got your presentation. Okay. Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to yet another meeting of our lovely Dublin AM Rotary Club and sauna today. So it's a little toasty in here, but we're going to start out with our invocation. Barb Anderson.
So good morning. I talked to a couple of my friends this past week, one who is Palestinian by email and one who is Jewish and Israeli by email. So we're grateful for they and we are grateful for all that's happened this past week, but we realize that there are still people suffering and still people living in darkness who need light. So I just bring you this from Parker Palmer. In times of great darkness, we not only need light, we need to be light for one another. The poet Mary Oliver recalls the story of the Buddha's last words, "Make of yourselves a light." We are the people who need to be light for one another, remembering that light comes in many forms. There is the light that allows us to find our way home in the dark. There is the light of human kindness that comforts everything it touches. There is the light that illuminates the pathway to a better world. And there is the light that gives us courage to walk that path in this world. None of us can provide all the kinds of light we need, but every one of us can shed some kind of light. Every day we can ask ourselves, what kind of light can I offer in this moment? And all God's people said, Amen.
Steve Schmidt will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Any announcements? Michael?
I have two announcements. The first one is the city of Dublin is having their fall document destruction event next Saturday, October 25th. Out at the service center from 9 AM to noon. We're gonna have 2 on-site document shredding trucks there, so if you have old documents. Please come out and patronize that and get rid of your documents, there's no charge. You can bring up to 5 boxes, but if you bring more, that's fine too. We appreciate the weights and the numbers, and then the other is the 125 Club. You'll be in a raffle to receive bourbon, wine. I'm still working on other real cool gifts and things, so I will be sending out a clipboard. If you were not here last week and would like to sign up, sign the clipboard and get entered into the raffle for the 125 Club. You get a pin. $100 goes to the foundation. What is it? $100 goes to
Foundation 25
to fight polio.
plus.
Okay. So that's how that works, and I will get that out and around, and I will have a verification on what's available next Friday, and we'll do the raffle on October 31st.
Great. And then for the document destruction thing, is there a bin for incriminating documents? Just asking for a friend. Okay. All right. So any other announcements? Wolf?
Morning, everybody. Wanted to remind everybody that this is Socktober Plus. Plus means that we're collecting not only socks, but gloves, scarves, hats, and underwear for people experiencing homelessness. So throughout this month, at every meeting, we have a collection, and I will try and remember to pick them up today. But for this month, we are trying to do that. The club that collects the most items in total and the most per capita, each will get $250 toward a happy hour or some other fun event. So, thank you.
Great. Any other announcements? Again, don't forget that we have our night at the races coming up on October 24th. So that's actually oh, look at that, next Friday. So please be sure to sign up. Get your friends to come along and bring family. Bring mere acquaintances, anybody. We'd love to have as many people as possible for that event. We have a gentleman from a sister club of ours that would like to make a presentation.
Let's come here with Donna speak there. Sarah. My name is Jerry Douglas. I'm with the Olentangy Rotary. We have a fundraiser going on right now. If anybody's interested, $20 tickets to win, four chances to win $100 down to $20 on NFL games in November.
Great. Fantastic. And we have a special Paul Harris presentation today. So Sue, if you could come on up.
Good morning, everyone. We have a very special award to present today. So I'd like Rosemary Hill and Susan West to come up here. Rosemary's husband was a member of the Dublin Worthington Club for probably around 30 or plus years. Very active in our community at Ohio State. He's an amazing man. I'm gonna let Susan talk about, but this is his wife. He passed away last year, and she was going through all of his special awards and found a pin, a Paul Harris pin, that she decided that she would really like to present to Susan West today. So we're here to make that happen. So just think about that, you know, all of our pins, you never know where they're gonna go to next. It's just so special. So I'm gonna turn this over to Susan.
So Rosemary Hill was married to Stacy Weisvogel, and I met them at the bank. But what was interesting is he wandered in, our bank is relatively new, opened 10 years ago. He was our first customer, and he wanted to open up a CD, and we're like, oh, we don't know how to open a CD. But anyway, I got to meet him and Rosemary, and over time, he was just so wonderful. I'm not sure if I knew he was a Rotarian, but one way he did affect this club is that at the time I was coordinating with Paige speakers. And he said, you guys should go to the OSU airport. So I don't know if you guys remember, but
Yeah.
when Mike was president, we did a tour of the airport, which I was just so pleased with. And then during the tour, I see this life-size picture of Stacy Weisvogel on the wall. He was so humble. He did so much for aviation, the School of Aviation, and OSU. It was just so wonderful. So yeah, it was a couple weeks ago, Rosemary shows me this pin. She's like, I researched this and I think this is something special. And I said, you know what? I'm almost to my first Paul Harris. So I called Susan. I'm like, hey, I wanna, accelerate my donations. And so we agreed that she could come today to give me Stacy's pin.
Isn't that cool?
I'm really happy to be able to share this pin with Susan. She's as you all know, she's a wonderful person, a wonderful professional, and it's meaningful for me, of course, to pass this on to somebody who knew Stacy. And I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh.
Susan.
Oh. Gosh, I'm so sorry. Usually I break
Well,
mirrors, not that.
There we go.
All right. Thank you for joining us today. Our Sergeant at Arms is Calvin.
Thank you for that warm welcome. I was sharing with my wife how excited I was to be this morning and receive such a warm welcome. And so you have satisfied that. We have a couple guests. Ingrid, do you have a guest?
Oh, we have a guest, returning is Carmen. Carmen, would you mind speaking?
She's with Tri-Village.
She is a member of Tri Village. Would you say this was,
a member of Tri-Village from, I think, 2018 to 2022. And then I moved up to Dublin, so I took some time off because it was quite the journey to get down to Tri-Village. And so Ingrid invited me to come and visit you all. And I work at the Big Commerce Foundation doing fundraising. So this. Thank you.
And of course, we have Susan West guests, Miss Rosemary. That's been accomplished. Our speaker is Sarah Douglas, but we also have the world famous Jerry Douglas from the Old Tangi Rotary Club. So he's been introduced. Fines. So I only have two fines this morning. One is for you, Trish, since you were trying to take my position at the Orange this morning. You were thinking about. Yep, you did. And the other fine today will be, since we have a great speaker and time and saving for time, everybody gets fined $1 today. Thank you. All right, so the small pot is $20. The large pot is $354. Would you like to drop?
259-3836. 3836. Is that Rich? All right.
All positive art.
Okay, this will be for the small pot.
3842. 3842. All right, thank you.
I'll let you know. Now get out of your way.
Thank you, Calvin.
Yep.
And to introduce our speaker today, Ingrid is going to come up and talk to us a little bit.
Keep it short, is that what you're really saying? Okay, all right, good enough. Well, Sarah, I must say, the only person who's been invited to speak as often as you has been our mayor. So it is a delightful treat for all of us that you've agreed to come back. Thank you very much. Everyone, of course, has Sarah's bio in your email. Suzanne, thank you for sending that out. I'll just remind people very quickly of the highlights as you get ready to start your talk. Sarah is a lecturer, senior lecturer at the Ohio State University, where she also received both her undergraduate, her master's, and her PhD, all within about 15 years of study. So quite an accomplishment there. I'd also mention that she's a fellow at the West Point Summer Seminar and a Department History Awards winner 8 times at Ohio State University. You have a number of research fellowships that are very impressive. She's a guest lecturer at Virginia Tech. Unbelievable credentials. And again, thank you so much for being here again as well.
Yeah.
Was once told by a student that I am too loud, but I will go ahead and use the microphone. I can project when I want to. Okay, can everybody hear me all right?
Yep.
All right, so obviously I've been here, I think this is the 3rd time talking about the war in Ukraine, which I'm happy to be here, not happy to still be talking about the war in Ukraine. But what I want to do is, there we go. Essentially, I'm not going to go through each of these, but the salient point to take away is that the war in Ukraine did not come out of nowhere. Wars don't just come out of nowhere, okay? Anybody, especially in hindsight, could have seen that this war was probably highly likely, if not nearly inevitable. Even going back to Soviet control of Ukrainian territory. Of course, there's a debate over the historical independence of Ukraine, the separation between Ukraine and Russia. It's not my goal to weigh in on any of these things, by the way. I look at this from a historical analysis point of view. So I would say there's arguments for a separate individual Ukrainian identity. They have their own language. I think that's a pretty good indication there was at least some semblance of historical Ukrainian identity, excuse me. At the same time, of course, particularly during the Soviet era, Ukraine was in the Soviet Union, very close ties to the Soviet Union, was really the heartland of the Soviet nuclear program in a lot of ways. In 1990, when the United States approached the East German and West German governments about reuniting and, of course, talked to the Soviets, the promise was that NATO would not step 1 foot further east. That is a confirmed promise that was made by the Secretary of State. Then the Cold War ends, and into the 90s, into the 2000s, NATO does expand. Now, conversely, the Russians almost immediately were very interested in effectively reconstituting Soviet power. Now, that is not reconstituting Soviet socialist power. The Soviets now, or the Russians now, excuse me, are very, I would say, anti-communist, anti-socialist. But we call this revanchism, which is where you want to reconstitute previous authority. So if you actually look at the moves of the Russians as early as actually 1990, even before the Soviet Union formally falls, and then throughout the 90s into the 2000s, the Russians are waging revanchist wars to reestablish their authority over former Soviet either satellites or directly controlled Soviet territory. At the same time as the EU was moving away from traditional sources of energy, they become increasingly reliant on Russian energy, which gives the Russians a good cash flow. Up until the late 20-teens, when the European Union starts to build independent sources of traditional energy that are going to circumvent Russia and thus take away its revenue stream. Okay. Putin is also getting older, and NATO is continuing to expand. If you look at the 20-teens in Ukraine in particular, you have a push away from Russian influence towards EU, even NATO sympathy. There was a political movement, some people call it revolution, it depends on which terminology you want to use, in 2015 that led to 2013 into 2014, that led to Ukraine moving away from Russian influence into EU, and then started hinting at wanting to be in NATO. And for Russians, this seemed to be a red line. This is how you have the fighting that starts happening in the Donbass, this region in eastern Ukraine, sponsored by the Russians. They are crossing the border into the Donbass. It is a guerrilla war. It's an insurgency. There is a lot of fighting that takes place there. It's incredibly violent. Gradually, loyal Ukrainians are either moving out, they are silenced, or some of them are even killed in the violence that happens. By 2016 to 2018, technically, there is a peace. Of course, during this time, Russia annexes Crimea. Western countries don't do anything about it. Sorry, my throat's a little dry this morning. I apologize, everybody. From 2020 to 2021, Russia starts amassing troops along the border, and the United States is openly stating that Ukraine is amassing troops. So when the invasion actually happens, it's really not a surprise, actually, okay? Most people figured it was coming. I think the only people that were surprised were, oh, thank you so much. Left my drink at the table. I think the only people that were surprised were the people that didn't think war was going to happen in the future after the end of the Cold War. There was this idea that emerged that the future was not going to see any more war. And in fact, if you've read, there's a famous article by a man named Francis Fukuyama who declared that we had reached the end of history, that wars were done. The only thing in the future was going to be these little ancillary conflicts between what he called the core and the periphery. And the future was going to be peaceful. Everybody's going to go to democracy. It's going to be great. So most people didn't think there would ever be a war in Europe again. And so the only people I think were surprised were the people that were thoroughly convinced that was true. That's not historically supported. What we know, of course, is when the invasion kicked off, the Russians advanced very quickly. And the sticking point was that they had to take Kyiv, traditional approach, invade a country, take the capital, country falls, you decapitate the leadership, replace it with leadership you like, and then you leave. We know the Russians thought this was going to be fast because in all of the destroyed armored personnel vehicles were parade dress. So they thought they were going to get there. Oh, and condoms. So they thought they were going to get there. They were going to have celebratory parades, have some fun. The Ukrainians were going to welcome them as liberators. And then they were going to leave and that was going to be it, which of course is not what happened at all. Okay. By the end of March, the Russians are forced to pull back from the capital because the Ukrainians offer incredibly staunch and innovative resistance to the invasion of the Russians. The Russians are taking extreme casualties in their attempts to get forces into the capital. Most people, including me, thought it would be over in 48 to 72 hours. Of course, that is not at all what happened. And Zelensky, the president, staying in the country helped with that a lot. And what a lot of people say now is, even if Ukrainian identity didn't exist before February 2022, it exists now, and its creator was Vladimir Putin, okay? Because it solidified Ukrainian identity around the Ukrainian state. Unfortunately, what ends up happening, and this is a theory I've been developing and a lot of people have been developing since industrialization, is that the thinking is that in any war where you have two heavily industrialized powers, and they have the will and the logistical ability to keep fighting, if victory is not achieved fast by one side, the result is going to be what we have now, which is endless attrition. It's what happened in World War I. It effectively did happen in World War II, and the only way it was overcome was with overwhelming destruction. Okay. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. Two industrialized powers, they want to keep fighting. They have the manpower and the resources to keep doing it. They have the will to keep doing it. Victory was not achieved fast. So now we're several years into this thing. Okay. The Russians exhibited fundamental tactical and operational failures, fundamental, such that my colleagues and I were continually shocked by how incompetent the Russians were on land and sea, to be blunt. Even simple river crossings, the Ukrainians knocked out an entire brigade in this operation. You might have heard of the Kharkiv offensive. This was the big Ukrainian counteroffensive that was able to gain back quite a bit of territory in the Kharkiv region using something called a thunder run. Fortunately, I don't have time to talk about what thunder runs are. Hopefully you remember when I talked about what they are. A pretty interesting, innovative tactical approach. But what you should notice is that by the end of 2022, all of the territory shaded in red, including that area of the Kharkiv region that is blue on this map, that's what Russia took. The Kharkiv offensive, which is one of the most successful modern offensives on record, did only seize that blue territory. Now, it's not inconsiderate, but it's certainly not a considerable percentage of the entire thing, okay? And so the Ukrainians continue harassment approaches. They bomb the Kursk Bridge. They've done it at least 3 times with different types of drones. Meanwhile, the Russians are digging trenches. The war in Ukraine is World War I Part 2 with drones. That's what this war is, okay? They are digging modern World War I style trench lines with front, middle, and backward trench lines. They resupply the trenches. Soldiers serve in the trenches. It's dangerous to leave the trenches. It's exactly like World War I. Now, what happens in 2023, probably most famously, is again comparing to World War I. If anybody knows anything about the battles that took place in 1916 in Europe, there is a very famous battle on the Western Front in Europe in 1916 that the location over which the battle was fought didn't really matter, but both the French and the Germans decided we're going to fight it out here. This is Verdun, okay? Verdun really didn't matter that much, but they made it matter, and they expended lots, over 1 million casualties at Verdun, okay? That is what happens when they fight over Bakhmut. Remember the fighting over Bakhmut. Bakhmut does not matter. It's not a rail depot. It's not a road depot. They don't produce stuff there. But both sides decided we're going to fight this thing out and expended enormous blood and treasure to do it. And the result was the Ukrainians, after about 6 months, just lost the city. Not talking the region, just the city. And then the Wagner group, which was the mercenary group that was leading the attack, launched a mutiny and tried to take over Moscow. I was following it on Twitter. It was very exciting. But this is Bakhmut. Exactly like World War I. Exactly. Here's Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner group. Essentially what happened is Prigozhin blinked at the last minute.
Yeah, I was gonna say, did he really think he was gonna win?
He blinked because what happened, well, what I think happened based upon what I've read, because of course I wasn't there, nor am I in intel, is they were in personnel carriers on the road north to Moscow. They were about 100 miles outside of Moscow. Moscow was setting up pillboxes with machine guns to stop them. They were not going to stop them from getting into Moscow. And the FSB went into the Wagner headquarters and got the personnel records of everybody in Wagner, called him on the phone, Prigozhin, and said, if you don't turn around, we're killing all of your families. So he blinked. Then he fled, then he got on a plane and it was bombed, and that was the end of the Wagner Group, which is having a really interesting cascading effect in Africa, because there were a lot of African countries, particularly in West Africa, that had turned to Russia and the Wagner Group to use as mercenaries and military advisors. And the replacements they've sent are terrible. So now a lot of those countries are turning back to France and the United States, which is good for US influence, at least arguably. Essentially, what ends up happening into 2024 and now this year is you're dealing with little bits, little offensives that are achieving little bits of ground. And again, it's exactly like World War I, where they are expending enormous manpower and material and gaining very little for it. The big benchmarks, of course, in 2024 is that Ukraine launches an offensive into Russia, and not just anywhere in Russia, in the Kursk region, which, if you're a Russian, few things are more important to you historically than the Kursk region because of World War II and the Battle of Kursk. It's incredibly ceremonially important to them. It is revered. They invaded Kursk for a reason. It's meant to be a slap in the face to the Russians. Look what we can do and you can't stop us. Kursk, of all places. Now, they have lost most of the territory that they gained, but it doesn't matter. They're still in Russian territory, okay? That said, it's actually a very small bit of Russian territory. This is, of course, when North Korean soldiers start showing up. Most of them are gone within a month. So into 2025, really, again, I'm not going to go into each of these because I could teach a whole semester class on this war. The point is, each side is launching offensives. They are trying, but the amount of ground they are gaining is small. It's teeny, okay, compared to what, let's say, the Ukrainians would need to achieve to get the Russians completely out of Ukrainian territory. Now, probably one of the best military theorists in history was a man named Karl von Clausewitz. I recommend you read him if you're interested in military theory. Absolutely brilliant man. He said, defense is the stronger form of warfare. And what that means is it's easier to defend a position than to take a position. So this is why you can have Thermopylae, 300 Spartans and actually about a few thousand other soldiers holding off a much larger force. This is why, let's say in 1565, the Siege of Rhodes, 6,100 Knights of Malta, or excuse me, not Rhodes, Malta, sorry. 6,100 Knights of Malta hold off 40,000 Ottoman soldiers. It's because defense is easier. If you think of it from a crime standpoint, think about police trying to get into a house with 2 criminals in the house that are armed. It's difficult, okay? So defense being easier doesn't mean you can win that way, though. Because at the end of the day, you still have to go on an offensive if you're on your own land. Or you have to outlast your enemy. Ukraine, again, this is my objective, dispassionate opinion, okay, does not have the manpower nor the material to launch an offensive strong enough to get Russia completely out of Ukrainian territory. But conversely, the Russians have wrecked their military. They have wrecked their economy trying to win this war. And they are not going to be able to take, let's say, all of Ukraine. And the only thing that would really topple the country now is taking Kyiv, and it's not going to happen. And so that is why you have attrition, okay? Someone's got to give, all right? It's estimated that by this time, Russian casualties over 1 million, with enormous percentage of that being killed in action, easily, probably 90% KIA. They will not do field medical treatment. They leave their soldiers to die. or they will kill them instead of trying to evacuate them. Because it's not worth the effort and the time. And they don't have the logistical medical infrastructure to support battlefield medical treatment. There's numerous videos of them doing this. Okay, so at least 1 million. Now you might say, how do the Russians sustain this? Well, most of the soldiers that they are recruiting are from Central and Western Russia, which means the Eastern Russians who dominate politics don't have to care about them. And Russia has no tradition of sort of self-sovereignty like the United States does. So, you know, if you think about the Civil War, which is the bloodiest, deadliest war in American military history, that's about 600,000 on both sides killed. And that's over, you know, 4.5, 5 years. And that's the deadliest war in American military history. Almost every other war in US history combined did not total how many died in the American Civil War. And again, in 2.5 years, Russia's over 1 million. Easily. Now, and what you notice is if you looked at that map that I put up from the end of 2022, do you notice there's not a lot of difference? It's because there's not a lot of difference. There's some, I'm not saying there's not any. The Russians right now, for example, are launching an offensive. They're trying to launch an offensive to get more territory because when Trump was elected, I think Putin tried to launch offensives to get as much land as he could to be in a better negotiating position in the event that the war did come to an end. But you're talking miles, and you're expending, they have no night capability. This will give you an example. They have no night capability. So the way that the Russians are advancing is they daisy chain, as in they hold hands, and the man at the front feels forward with his hands, and the Ukrainians just sit and watch it on night vision. And then when they feel like it, they open fire, and then the men scatter. That's what's happening, okay? Or they're using what are called human waves, which is you just try to overwhelm the enemy with just so many soldiers that the enemy can't, you know, shoot them all, kill them all. The major innovation that everybody hears about in this war, of course, is drones. Drones. Now, drones are really important, but also not as important as you think. So it's sort of like World War I and air power. If anybody likes World War I air power here, I'm very sorry. Air power in World War I didn't really matter that much, okay? Drones are very important in this war, but also I think we've overestimated how important they are in some ways, okay? The cycle of innovation in this war now is about every 6 months. So the Ukrainians innovate, the Russians respond, the Ukrainians innovate, the Russians respond. And again, it's in about a 6-month cycle right now, as far as we can tell. What most people thought before Ukraine was that the future was going to be one where drones and unmanned aerial vehicles are important, but they're going to be big, they're going to have heavy payloads, and effectively they're just going to replace the manned fighter. So it's going to be like the manned fighter, but just not with the man, okay? So what Ukraine has shown is that's not the case at all, actually. Although the war in some ways did start that way, is that the war did start in some ways with the implementation of very large drones. So bigger drones on the larger scale, longer range, heavier payload, more like a Predator drone that we know about. But at the same time, there was this innovation born out of necessity. I think one of my favorite quotes is, people are really good at innovating if they think they'll die the next day, okay? People in Ukraine were just going and buying drones, and they're called FPV drones, first-person vision, drones, and they just strapped munitions to them. And you can see, where's the one? I think it's my next slide. I'll show it in a minute. You'll see there's a drone. Oh no, this one on the bottom right. Sorry, the Zoom stuff's covering it. You can see that's just a bottle full of flammable liquid. And the idea is it impacts, sets a liquid. It's a flying Molotov cocktail. That's all that is. Or, you know, you strap numerous other types of munitions to them and you send them up, and they're what we would call more generally, there is a specific drone called a kamikaze drone, but now that's sort of like Band-Aid or Kleenex, right? There is a type of FPV we call kamikaze drone where all you do is you just ram it into your target. It's $50. You know, it's not millions of dollars like a Predator drone. It's a $50, $100 drone. You strap munitions to it. You ram it into the target. It's achieved what you wanted it to achieve. The number of drones has escalated quite markedly. By 2023, Ukraine was producing 50,000 FPV drones a month. So the place to be in the world right now, if you're interested in drones, is Ukraine, because there are several private companies that have sprung up in Ukraine to produce FPV drones. But again, you're dealing with that innovation adaptation. What the Russians began doing is they began jamming the signals of the FPV drone because the drone has to communicate to an operator. And they do so via a radio signal. So you jam the radio signal, which the Russians have always had that technology ever since radios have existed, because back in World War I, we jammed radio communication if we could, right? So the Russians find ways to adapt. But you have more drones going up into the air, more different types of drones. The Russians break out their Soviet era jamming technology, but of course these are easy targets, so they began innovating with smaller technology. We're entering the era of the drone swarm. You also have naval drones that the Ukrainians are using. The Moskva that got sunk, I know I talked about that when I was here one time, the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet that the Ukrainians sunk. They sunk it with drones. Those little splashes in the water are the Russians trying to shoot the drone that you see right there that actually did hit its target and sank another light cruiser in 2024. Now the Russians, because primarily of drones and also like surface to air shoulder mounted missiles, cannot operate on the water and they can't operate in the air over Ukraine. Gets shot down immediately or it gets sunk. We also have drone on drone warfare that has emerged. Okay. I'll come back. Well, so here you can see, if you see in this picture, see the black marks on the sides? That's because this is a Ukrainian drone picture hunting down the Russian drone in the picture. And then they just crash in and then they both collapse. They both fall down. But you also have drone motherships that have emerged where you have bigger drones with further range, smaller drones that are mounted on the bigger drones. The bigger drones go further distance because they're bigger and have more power. And then the small drones launch from the bigger drones. So now we have drone motherships. The Ukrainians invented what they call Dragon drones, which drop thermite into Russian trenches, what you're seeing here. Thermite's very hard to put out, in case you are not aware. Then, of course, you have innovations in electronic warfare. You've got, directed energy weapons. You have people that carry these anti-drone packs on them that essentially drones will just drop right out of the sky. So then you have to invent signal hopping so that the drones can stay on a signal that's not being jammed. Okay, so signal hopping is a thing that's emerged. Funnily enough, the thing that's now most demanded in Ukraine are 50 caliber machine guns and shotguns, because the two things most effective against drones are people that are really good at skeet shooting or duck hunting and people with good skills on a 50 cal. Here you can see this soldier on the top left shooting at a drone. You can see the little splotch. The Ukrainians have even started, because drones are such a problem, covering roadways with netting, which is what you're seeing right here. You're also seeing increasingly interesting cages mounted to the sides of tanks and artillery pieces to keep the drones from making contact with the structure itself. Because of the signal problems, the Russians have invented fiber optic drones where there is a spool of fiber optic cable in the drone so that the operator, now you're limited in distance because obviously there's only so much fiber optic cable that a drone can carry, but you launch the drone and it spools out the fiber optic cable. A signal jammer can't do anything about fiber optic cable because you're directly in contact. So, key takeaways. Drones are harassment weapons. They're terror weapons. If you see any World War II movie, you know, there's always the German plane that when it dives, it goes, you know, most German planes didn't do that. Okay. And that was a sound that was made to terrorize people on the ground that were being bombed by the German plane. The sound of drones is giving people PTSD. And if you've ever heard a little FPV drone, they're really little and it's like a high sound. If you watch footage, the soldiers are being terrorized by the sound of them. There's ethical issues because you don't always necessarily know who it is you're targeting. And it's also problematic because if you're Ukrainian, how do you know the drone nearby is yours or if it's Russian? There's not necessarily a way to tell. So that's why they're going through so many drones, is because they can't just assume a nearby drone is theirs. They have to shoot it. If it gets near them, they shoot it down. And it might be one of theirs. They don't know, unless the drone team is with them. So the biggest innovation with drones, though, it's estimated that only about 20% to 40% of drones that go after people or targets hit their targets. So although we see a lot of footage of that, that's sort of catered for a certain audience, okay? Best Ukrainian drone teams, 40% accurate, okay? The big innovation, which again, like World War I, the big innovation is observation. Long-range drones that can observe enemy positions. It has widened what we consider the front, so that now it's much easier to see troop movements behind the front line. You can see logistical support moving up. This is one reason why the Russians don't want to bring up medical treatment, is because 10 kilometers behind the front line, the Ukrainians know they're coming and they can target artillery at them. But the biggest killers in this war are still artillery, mines, and handheld firearms, like World War I, okay? So drones are making a big difference in this war, but in some ways also not. This war is still going to be won or lost, unless it's negotiated, by infantry on the ground seizing territory. And the main way to do that is with tanks, artillery, and infantry that are willing to fight it out on the ground. Now, of course, I'm sure all of you have heard that there are more peace talks that are pending. I'm going to hope, triumph of hope over experience. This leads to a negotiated peace. But I think we have intractable positions that I'm not sure are going to make it easy for a peace to be had. But let's hope. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yes. Do you think that, well, Zelensky's meeting with Trump today,
Yes.
do you think that Trump will give him the Tomahawk missiles he's asking for?
Not 100% no. Not necessarily yes. I think it depends on the outcome of the meeting with Rubio and whoever the Russians are sending when they meet. What is it, later this week or early next week? I think that will make the difference. If they get Tomahawks, that means that the Ukrainians can start striking targets, more Russian energy. They've already targeted a lot of Russian energy infrastructure, actually. They can target more, they can destroy more. They can start targeting production plants. So it will certainly help the Ukrainians, but at the end of the day, in my opinion, that's not going to do what the Ukrainians would need to do to achieve the peace that Zelensky, I think, ideally wants, which is we want it all back. And it's, in my opinion, that is never going to happen.
We see recent buildup by Norway, their military, Finland, their military, Estonia. I know that's a defensive strategy on their part.
Yes.
With your studies and your analysis of the whole complex area, are those areas that are likely to be invaded or Poland in terms of their proximity to Russia, or is this so much in Ukraine that the Russians don't have the capacity to do that?
Well, so there's no love lost between the Finns and the Russians. They are not fans of one another, to say the least. If anybody knows about the Winter War, very bloody fight. I think that it is smart for them to build up. I think the idea that Russia is never going to be a threat again is incorrect. But, a friend of mine said to me, well, what happens if Russia moves on Finland or Poland? And I said, with what? They were in 2020, late 2022, pulling stuff out of museums because they are out of material. The reason that they are launching these little offensives, but are mostly relying on like long, or like technically hypersonics, which what they call hypersonics, not hypersonic. We don't need to get into it, but it's because they can't do anything else. They don't have anything else. They have decimated their military for a decade, at least. So that is not to say it's not a threat at all, but Putin is smart enough not to invade a NATO country because he knows what's going to happen. You have to keep an eye on the polls because they get a little excited. So we just have to make sure the polls can arm but it's not spark Article 5. I don't think it's wrong for them to be concerned. I don't think it's realistic to think that the Russians anytime soon could do anything to Poland or Finland or anybody. Yeah.
Last question, Rich?
I was just curious, what we see on the news media is that Russia seems to be making civilian attacks.
Yes.
Where Ukraine is more strategic with refineries and stuff. Is that an accurate presentation from the media?
Yeah, I would say that's accurate. I mean, the Russians, blunt instrument. They try to aim for important infrastructure, but they don't care about the peripheral effects of that. I would say that's the thing, is that we in the modern era are so hypersensitive to collateral damage that, we're, I'm not going to say excessively careful, but the Russians don't exhibit any of that caution. They're trying to aim for certain targets. Sometimes it's terror bombing, which you target civilians when you terror bomb. And that's not to say the Ukrainians aren't killing civilians when they bomb Russian targets, but it's in no way comparable. In no way comparable. The Ukrainians are showing a care the Russians in no way are. Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Douglas. That was fascinating. Our next meeting is next Friday, October 24th, right here. We're going to be having a service project for women's support. So we'll look forward to seeing you next Friday. Our quote of the day: the only way human beings can win a war is to prevent it. George C. Marshall. Have a great weekend. I'm sorry?
I said that's an interesting quote from George C. Marshall.
Is there a
Thank you for coming.
Match, I'm a historian to her. So, but.
Get a picture here real quick?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
To put it all in perspective, the loss of and I saw.
Problem is. Unless I'm very, just like this, I have. So I'm happy to give it to you, but we need to coordinate when you're gonna do that, so I'm ready.
Well, the reason they don't want to. It's very.
I'll go delete those videos. So if you just keep giving me the list, it's just not time, it takes 2 minutes to do that. So that was just. We need to get it better.
So to then, just have two big pieces, because it's.
Well,
It's
post them in.
central.
I don't mind.
Western, yeah. You know what I mean?
All right.
It's like,
All right, well, let's do that as a next one. And like I said, if you need to get on it, you know, it's, yeah.
No,
Well,
it's like not.
Anything for Friday?
Whenever I do that, you know, this.
We only got 7 days, buddy.
I'm not here, I can remember. Yeah, I can do all that. Everybody else.
Because it's people that focus on Russian society, that they don't engage in. So like, for example, and there's a businesses who just came in, right? And they went out and they sort of exact, and they went into their kids' lives. They made them coffee. Yeah, no, the kids are. Never seen a microwave. And so they took out over the fire to keep the car. And it's not to say there are no. Was the Russian National Guard was sent to training.